Okay, hi everybody, and I didn't know whether I'd be able to do a program tonight. I'm going to give it a try. The hour is late here, and the morning comes early because it will be Advent Sunday, I believe. So today is the 27th of November, and we're looking at program 35 for Telepathy and the Etheric Vehicle, and page 88. The book has about 192 or 93 pages. So as you can see, we still have a ways to go. We're talking about, in this little segue, the circumstances under which a disciple can be trusted under the hierarchical rules with the deliberate creation of thought forms designed to produce special effects, and with their dispersal to men and groups. Well, the idea behind this is that until the transfiguration initiation is taken, and until the disciple is a chela within the aura, which is actually the fifth stage of discipleship, there being 6 or 7, depending on how you count, then he can be trusted after he has passed the tests of the transfiguration initiation. And it's right around page 687 of the rays and the initiations, where we find the different types of freedom for each of the initiations. And for the transfiguration, it is freedom from the ancient domination or dominance of the threefold personality. So this is really the beginning of a very important procedure that leads into the spiritual triad and towards the higher subplanes of the spiritual triad, and eventually towards the monad and beyond. Now, so here we are, basically having finished program 34. I seem only to be able to do short programs at this time, which is my regret, but there are so many other so many other broadcasts and the like, webinars, which have to be taken care of, that it kind of puts a little bit of a cramp in the flow of doing these telepathy programs. But, sometimes you just take a chance and you begin, and hopefully can at least produce a program of approximately 1 hour at least. Now, DK goes on to say, if a major world test were to be made, those receptive to impression would be found to fall into two groups. So let's see how he looks at this. Group number one, okay. And now, indeed, page 88. Those possessing unconscious receptivity to telepathic impression. And those who have the unconscious receptivity, kind of instinctual telepathy, they, says the Tibetan, at present constitute a majority wherein the impression is received via the solar plexus, and the thought forms thus generated are dispatched from the throat center of the one who is the impressing agent. So there is an impressor and an impressed, and it is found there is a line of connection from throat center to solar plexus center. And let's put that down. The impression via the solar plexus and via the throat center of the one who is impressing. Okay, so he's saying if there were a test, we would find two types, and the first type would be this. Now, I think I saw something of this nature relatively recently, and I think the world did too, when there was an attack on what you might call the Temple of Democracy in the United States. The insurrection which raided the Capitol and hoped to overthrow due process according to the Constitution. That was, as you see the people reacting, it was solar plexus telepathy. And interestingly enough, they were encouraged by words from the throat centers of unenlightened people, and even deliberately demagogic types. And there were a number of them who hoped to wield the crowd for their own benefit, and very nearly succeeded. in their attack upon the Congress and Senate of the United States. Now, who else? Number two, those who are developing or have developed a conscious sensitivity, wherein the impression is, first of all, received by the mind, and then imparted to and registered by the brain. So let's give that some received by the mind and imparted to and registered by the brain. Now, in this case, DK goes on to say, the one who is the impressing agent, in this case, works via the center between the eyebrows, the ajna center. And we remember, don't we, that the new group of world servers is considered the ajna center of Sanat Kumara, and humanity, normal humanity, the throat center. So we're learning something here that is of importance regarding the impressing agent. There are two areas from which impression comes, and one is the throat center, and of course much damage can be done depending upon the motive of the impressing agent and what kind of words are used. And then the ajna center, which is likely to be a more spiritual type of impression. So ponder on that for just a moment. The impressing agent or group impressor works through the throat center or the ajna center. Now, maybe when we become permitted to be impressing agents, the same kind of choice will lie before us. And hopefully, as potential members and members of the new group of world servers, we will use the ajna center, either the individual ajna center or the group ajna center. Now, DK elaborates here a little bit. The first group of recipients are purely personality grounded and focused. In some cases, they are only physically aware of the life processes and of some contact which remains for them unrecognized and unchecked or uncontrolled in any way. Okay. Well, personality. Let's see what we can do with that. So, purely personality grounded or focused, only physically aware of the life processes and of some contact, which remains for them unchecked and uncontrolled in any way. And, going back to this, insurrection that we had, where the battle for democracy is at first being fought out, you can certainly see the astral receptiveness. And you can see that they were swept by certain thoughts, and that those thoughts were not controlled. They did not evaluate the thoughts. They simply gave their assent because, let us say, someone they believed in had uttered them, that is, the thoughts. I'm remembering when the former president said, we're going to go down to the Capitol and I'll be with you. Well, that was a signal for a big lie. He didn't accompany them at all, and he worked to prevent them from relenting. He worked from the White House to prevent them from relenting in their anti-constitutional insurrection. So this is the more primitive group, and there are examples of it all over the world. Now, sometimes the phenomenon of war fever has taken over people, a strange kind of excitement as they enlisted to go off and supposedly, I suppose in their minds, completely trounce the enemy. It sweeps through the many people, that strange type of excitement. Of course, it is later proven to be illusory as the cold, hard realities of what war is come home to those who so enthusiastically enlisted. But still there's that sweeping through, unchecked and uncontrolled, of something that drives them. Under this group, says the Tibetan, we must therefore class all mediumistic phenomena. May I interpolate, from the spiritualist movement under the seventh ray, and so popular in earlier days. So he's classifying the mediumistic movement as uncontrolled and unchecked, perhaps more so when Cancer or Pisces are involved, and less so when Virgo is involved. So all mediumistic phenomena, including the appearance or disappearance of those discarnate beings who are still very close to the earth and maybe have something to communicate to those who have gathered to call them forth. So mediumistic phenomena, even those of the highest astral or spiritual nature, plus the messages received from the usually beautiful subconscious of the average person upon the probationary path, messages, upon the probationary path. Okay, let me isolate that just a little bit. So I will bolden mediumistic phenomena, astral phenomena, and messages received from the usually beautiful subconscious. He gives us three types of phenomena that can be classified under this heading as unrecognized, the contact, that is, the cause remains unrecognized, and not checked and not controlled. Well, let's see what I'll do. And of course, these kinds of phenomena or impressions are believed readily and without the application of a critical judgment. I'll get the word subconscious. Right. And it's people upon the probationary path who receive this kind of impression. And of course, many who are even more unconscious of the source, and they have to do with average people who are being manipulated by the demagogic impulse, by the demagogues who see the vulnerability in this type of person and want to use that vulnerability for their own ends. Now, however, messages from the disciples' own soul are intermediate between these mediumistic expressions and those which are definitely mental in nature. I suppose he's speaking of the higher mind here, because it's hard to see how the lower mind itself could be a source for reception higher than the soul. But the abstract mind, yes. But perhaps we have two things here: messages from the soul and messages which are definitely mental in nature, which I would say are intermediate between the usual kind of unconscious messages that are not controlled. And here I'm going to emphasize that a little bit. The mind and its impressions, followed by the soul and its impressions, transcend the mediumistic receptions and in general, the lower personality receptions. So if we're dealing with the concrete mind, it has to be an intermediary between the more astral receptions, the definitely illusory receptions, and the receptions of the soul. But if we're dealing with receptions that come into the lower part of the spiritual triad on the first subplane of the higher mind, well, then that holds a slightly superior position to what we usually call the soul, and is arrived at through the building of the antikarana. Now DK goes on. With this last mentioned type of communication, there will be found mixed certain messages or impressions from the ashram, which the disciple will be apt to confuse with group telepathy, soul communication, and direct relation with the master. Right. And basically he's telling us that at the stage we're talking about, the direct communications or direct relation with the master is non-existent. And basically, think of it, without Alice Bailey, there would have been no medium through which to pass so that the master could communicate directly and knowingly. At least the knowing would appear on the part of the recipient, with the people gathered around. He might telepathically send something in their direction, but they wouldn't recognize it. They wouldn't recognize it. And because of Alice Bailey as the instrument, then the people, out of trust for AAB and so forth, did come to recognize what the master was attempting to convey to them. So anyway, the master does not have, at this point in the process, a knowing response from those to whom he is sending telepathic messages via the, let's call it, the science of impression. And what we're learning is that messages or impressions from the ashram are easily confused with something else, with group telepathy, with soul communications, and with direct relationship to the master. So many are these types of impression that some sort of work with vibratory discrimination is needed before they can be recognized and not just kind of blindly experienced, recognized by those who have been gathered by the master. I'm still remembering a number of statements he made, which, if I were to summarize what he's saying, I wonder if you realized how I helped you during that moment of, or that time of distress through which you were passing, or weakness, or vulnerability. I wonder, says the Tibetan, if you recognized that I was there. And then we can ask ourselves, when we're low and we suddenly are lifted up on what might be called a psychic gift wave, are we recognizing the source of this intervention? Well, now, DK elaborates a little here, and he says, you know, whether or not we're establishing a relationship with the master, a conscious relationship, he says this will not greatly matter, because when the disciple begins to realize certain differences, a new type of registration will awaken and guide the disciple's consciousness. Okay. Just want to get this. So there will be recognitions, there will be failure to recognize, and DK is pointing out which of these is really important. And he's pointing out possible areas of confusion into which we can easily slide. We have to be inwardly very attentive. Instead of just going with the stream of the manner in which we are prompted, if we are more sensitive, we may know from whence the prompting comes. Now we're in this second type of impression, the type that where impression is received by the mind and then imparted to the brain. So it's much more under control. Of course, there are those quite good minds which have seized upon errors and are so good at the false, or the art of false justification, that they manage to believe what has come to them of an erroneous nature. We see a lot of this in the conspiracy theories of the present time. Good minds believing and justifying outlandish possibilities, and very stubbornly resistant to the possibility that their theories are without value. Okay. Going then a little further. So this stage, which embraces the second type of impression in its earliest forms, can be quite a long one, for it covers a very definite period of transition from the astral plane to the mental plane. We become a true mental receiver, and our sources are higher than just the throat center of some manipulative demagogue or groups of demagogues. If the demagogues would examine their motives, which they tend not to do, or which they tend to interpret in self-justifying ways, there might be more changes of a positive nature from the demagoguery to something that had inclusive and mutual benefit for many. And demagogues are self-seeking. They maybe don't even know how self-seeking they are. They will not examine their motives truthfully. So, quite a long one, because of the transition, I suppose, over a number of incarnations from simple glamorous receptivity to something that is much more logical, and eventually more soul-inspired, and eventually more triadally and monadically inspired. Now, says the Tibetan, the time equation varies according to Ray and the age of the soul. That is an important statement. Okay. Let's make sure that you're seeing what I hope you're seeing. There are many little technical things to take care of, especially when I'm my own speaker and my own engineer, audio engineer. and video engineer. So probably there's a formula for the duration of these various stages according to the ray. Now, certainly, ray cycles vary. Of the ones I can remember, we have ray 1 cycles based on the number 1 and expanding. Ray 2 cycles on the number 5 and expanding. Ray 3 cycles on the number 9 and expanding. And then a few of them have been researched by the rayologist Stephen Pugh, and he gives 2.5 and expanding to ray 4 cycles, 3.5 and expanding to ray 5 cycles, and 1.5 and expanding to ray 6 cycles. But then the Tibetan seems to give this also when he breaks down the expression of the 6 ray into 150 year increments, but warns us that they are not simply cut and dried increments, but they overlap in many cases. And then again, ray 7, based on 7 and expanding. Now, what is it that could cause a delay in the transition from the astral receptivity to mental receptivity? The human race has long been in a glamorous or beglamored situation. Any kind of mental focus is a much more recent development. And so for many, it doesn't even really exist to any great extent, or if it does, it is so secondary to the naturally existing astral focus. Now, what does he say about 6th ray people? He says 6th ray people, for instance, are very slow in making this transition owing to the pronounced factor of glamour. So they do hang on. And the transition for 2nd and 3rd ray people, 1st and 2nd ray people, is faster. So, 6th ray people are hanging on for dear life as they seek to adhere to the one and only thing that at the moment makes sense to them, the one and only way of being. and glamour closes over them, and they are misled by the false light. Sometimes this is called the light of error, or the light that goes over the swamp. In German, the Irrlicht, IRR, I think, LICHT. But first and second rate people are relatively quick. So, okay. This, and what we're talking about, remember, we must remember, we're talking about a very definite transition from the astral plane to the mental plane. Think about that for a moment. See, the astrally inclined people, if you say to them, well, let's really look into this, let's really think about this, you will oftentimes get a very astral reaction, because they don't want to endanger what they're holding on to and in which they are believing fervently. And when you suggest, let's look at this with the mind, then, of course, they resist. It says here as well, from DK, third-ray people are also slow, for they are lost in the threads of their own glamorous manipulation and their devious thinking, and hardly know where truth begins and illusion ends. Illusion, which is the problem of the mental types on all rays, is far more temporary in its effects than delusion. And maybe delusion has more to do with the astral plane. I'm going to put this in the color green, because we're speaking specifically of the third ray. And I have dealt with people even recently where I had to try to point this out, exactly what DK is saying, but it becomes true that they hardly know where truth begins and delusion ends. Yeah, because delusion is having to do with the subsiding of glamour. And we are making a transition from quite unconscious astral polarization or fixation or just focus into a higher form of focusing. On the level of the mind, and especially when that mind is held steadily in the light of the soul. And a lot of the trouble in today's world comes from this combination of third and sixth rays. Now, maybe the most glamour-prone individual in the Tibetans group, I've mentioned him quite a few times before, was a certain LTSK. And he had a third ray soul and a sixth ray personality. Now, there would be an improvement in the next life because he was slated, probably in the plans of the solar angel, to have a personality upon the second ray eventually, and maybe at first upon the first ray. So that would definitely ameliorate the situation. Some of the heaviest glamours that we have relate to devotion or dedication and the sixth ray, and also to the purely financial situation, where everything, all of life, is monetized. Think of the sentence about another human being. Well, how much is he worth? Well, it's a complete missing of the point, isn't it? As if the accumulation of money could tell you how much the individual is worth, when all the deep qualities built up over many years and stored up in the causal body, in the egoic lotus, are completely ignored. It's a huge glamour. And we've, for the last 5 years or so, been abused by an individual and his cronies who see each other as worth the money that they have. Who's the richest man in the world? Who are the top billionaires? That's how much they're worth? Well, what kind of values, spiritual values, do they really have at all? Now, to people like you and I, well, like you and me, really, it doesn't sound right, but it is right. This is very primitive thinking that is full of illusion and delusion. We cannot imagine evaluating another person in terms of his financial accumulations. Some of the very richest people have significant psychopathologies which render them into the condition of not being a very spiritual person at all. Real spirituality is very far from them. Okay, when the disciple has mastered to some degree the significant differences between the messages from his own subconscious or the subconscious mind or subconsciousness of other people with whom he may be en rapport, and the messages coming from his own soul, his life then becomes more self-directed and organized, more fruitful from the angle of service, and therefore of definite use to the hierarchy. Well, that's what lies ahead for us. And he's not saying it has to be complete mastery. He says mastery to some degree. And we're looking for significant difference between messages from his own subconscious, well, it's a kind of an adjective, but used as a noun, or that of other people, or with others with whom he may be en rapport, everything improves. Everything improves. And I'll just make this indicative of that improvement. I've seen people smugly reading from their tablets or their jottings or whatever the latest messages they have received from the master even, or at least from the soul, without any suspicion whatsoever that such messages are coming from the subconscious area of their psyche. So, also, he learns to distinguish the messages coming from his own soul. Now, I'll interpolate and say they will never be bad. They may be good, coming from his own soul, and from those messages, yes, which are hierarchical. His life becomes more clearly directed. So, are we among those who can distinguish in that way? It's a question. Oop. So there's one distinction after another. I'm getting a little haziness here, and I'm not sure why. I'll try this. Well, it finally cleared up a little bit. So we're dealing with one distinction after another, and the benefits of such distinctions or discriminations. And they appear to be progressive. Now, DK says, of the distinguishing disciple, he next distinguishes definitely and accurately the communications which come to him from the ashram and which are sent out to make impression upon the minds of aspirants and disciples of all degrees and of all ray types. Well, I suppose this goes on in every ray ashram and probably carries greater weight for the particular ray of the ashram. But there are now, or will be, subsidiary ray types in any type of ray ashram. Now, the second ray ashram is virtually complete and has subsidiary types on the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh rays. So the true members of the ashram, those who have been brought within and are chelas within the aura, are serving the master by sending forth these impressions. Okay. Okay, and let me kind of write. He next distinguishes, says the Tibetan, definitely and accurately the communications which are sent out to him, which come from the ashram, and which are sent out to make impression upon the minds of aspirants and disciples of all degrees and ray types. How much indeed there is going on within this type of communication. So this is a list of distinctions and discriminations. When he can, says the Tibetan, when he can distinguish between these various communications, then and only then does the third type of communication become possible: direct messages, which are due to contact with the master of his ashram in person. Okay. Now, as I say, except for a very few cases, without Alice Bailey, the direct communications to any of those chelas of the time would have been, I think, not in general possible. But she acted as a bridge to allow more direct communication to arise. So direct communication with the master of his ashram. Now, he's most definitely then a chela within the aura, I would say. The master may be telepathically active with him well before that period, and even in that stage of chela on the thread, may be responding to the importunity of the disciple with very little requirement of too great an expenditure of energy on the part of the master. But this is not the same as direct and recognized contact with the master. Now, Alice Bailey obviously had that. She was speaking with him directly, even though he was a, let's say, a sub-initiate or submaster in the greater Ray Ashram of her own master, Master K.H., with whom she also had direct communication. Now, when it comes to direct communication with such an illustrious figure as Sanat Kumara, I suppose we have to wait until we are of the status of the Christ or the Buddha. And there is an initiator which is active at the 6th initiation, to whom no name is given to us. Sorry. And he is also obviously of very high rank, otherwise he would not be administering, as we learn in initiation, human and solar, the sixth initiation, whereas Sanat Kumara is not, and the planetary logos as a whole is not. Now, I just have to ask all of us, where would such information come from, if not from the communications of one who knew, not just an intelligent person who is speculating upon this and that and could very well write or bring forward the kinds of messages which he or she thinks comes from the master. I've always asked such people, who are often my friends, why don't you really think about that, and whether you, with your intelligence, could not somehow produce the very thing that you think the Master is producing through you. But the desire to be in direct touch with the Master becomes so dominating that it's difficult to get through. Now, the third type of communication of direct messages, which are due to direct and recognized contact with the Master. Now, as far as we know, Alice Bailey may have been the only one there that had that. Roberto Assagioli was of the status, the disciple FCD as he's known, was of the status to be able to receive this, but even he had to be, as it were, reminded by the Tibetan of an interview which he had had at night in his master's ashram, which was the ashram of Master K.H. Assagioli could not bring that through, or in that particular case, at least it did not enter the brain consciousness. So the Tibetan, through Alice Bailey, reminded him of this, oversight, you might say, because obviously it was a very important interview, as I am remembering about it, or what I've read about it. It seemed to include a future in which Roberto Assagioli was undertaking the tasks of the fourth initiation. So, this was no small matter. Anyway, if the disciple, who is really by now the initiate, receives such direct and recognized contact and maybe dialogue with the Master in daily life, then the Tibetan has this to say about it. He, by that time, possesses what has been called the freedom of the ashram and the keys to the kingdom of God. He can then be trusted with some of the directive potency of the ashram itself. His thinking will then affect and reach others. This developing effectiveness grows with rapidity until the fourth type of impression is familiar to the disciple. So let me just stop here as we see the okay. He possesses the keys to the kingdom. Now, I think I'm quite accurate in thinking that none of us who are studying in this way are possessing the keys to the kingdom, or the freedom of the ashram, which indicates the fifth stage of discipleship. Do I notice how ongoingly important is this factor of trust when it comes to carrying out ashramically related duties? The members of the hierarchy are not naive, and if a individual, a disciple, a becoming initiate has not proved himself, it would be foolishness to trust them, because they could easily be overcome by some unsuspected energy, and then a greater loss of time would occur. So, the thinking of such a person can finally begin to affect and reach others. Note, just the thinking can then affect and reach others. He doesn't necessarily have to talk to them in person or have them read his books or however he brings forth his thoughts. The thinking itself is powerful enough to reach others. Now, I would say that an initiate of the third degree does have the freedom of the ashram, and there are there is a kind of interesting story about the alcoves, and it's a symbolic piece of writing involving the way a disciple moves forward in the ashram from pillar to pillar, with the master or his secretary seen in the distance. And there are certain laws about how that is done. Anyway, going on a little bit, but not too much, because, we still have a bit more to go, and for me, the hour is late, and the demands of tomorrow being the first Sunday of Advent are too strong to keep going the way I might otherwise like to persist. Anyway, this developing effectiveness, grows when, with rapidity, when the fourth type of impression is familiar to the disciple. And I'm even thinking about the fourth initiation and how immediately before that initiation, the acquisition of and knowledge is rapid indeed. There's a link there. We're not exactly talking about the same thing, but there is a link, I think. So this developing effectiveness grows with rapidity when the fourth type of impression is familiar to the disciple, that coming from the spiritual triad, and note what he says here, therefore from the monad and Shamballa, because the triad is really an aspect of the monad, only divided into three representations of the monad. The monad is triangular also: will, wisdom, and activity. But here we have Atma, Buddhi, Manas as reflections of the monad considered as a unity. So what is this fourth type of impression? And that coming from the spiritual triad, and therefore from the monad, and therefore from Shambhala. Now, of course, as I say these things, I'm well aware that they are pretty much words, and that the full experience is certainly not mine, and belongs to very few, at least in our ranks. But the fourth type of impression, let's see if I can enhance that a little bit. But we do move from soul impression via the Antakarana to triadal impression, always ascending within the triad. That's why building this Antakarana is so very, very important. It takes us into an elevated stage of consciousness or point of tension. There are consequently, says the Tibetan, to this final stage of impression, three lesser, though definite states, each making an expansion in the realm of service, and each related to the last three initiations of the total possible 9 initiations which confront developing humanity. Now, this is really of interest. Let's see if we can find a way. Yeah, well, I think the whole thing can be marked in this manner. So, third type, direct impressions from the master. And let's see if we can The first type is reception that involves the personality. The second type involves the soul. The third type, direct impressions from the master. And the fourth type, from the spiritual triad itself. That seems to be the correct way of looking at this. Well, it's complicated, actually. And there's a lot to continually study until we can be definite about the different types of impression. Now, I won't go on much more. The sixth initiation, in which only masters can participate, this is Tibetan speaking, of course, marks the transition from the first three stages of impressibility required by the disciple as prelude to the fifth initiation, or in reality to the third, fourth, and fifth, and are related to the three stages of triadal communication, each of which is related to the seventh, eighth, and ninth initiations. So maybe we could say the atmic developments would be related to the ninth. Let's see. Wait a second. The yeah, it's clear that the three stages of triadal communication, which are atmic, buddhic, monastic, spiritual will, intuition, spiritual love, pure reason, and higher mind, are related to the seventh, eighth, and ninth initiations. So it looks like, at least I can offer a thought on this, that the ninth initiation would be related to Atma of the triad, the eighth initiation to Buddhi of the triad, and the seventh initiation to the abstract mind of the triad. And then there's a further kind of threefoldness that can continue when we have the third, fourth, and fifth initiations. Maybe, well, not a maybe. The fifth initiation is definitely connected with Atma. The fourth initiation definitely with Buddhi, and the third initiation definitely with the abstract mind, which itself is a little higher than what we normally call the soul. In any case, we can study this. It has the idea of the superimposed triangles, basically. A higher leading to a lower, or vice versa. And then, of course, we have these other stages of impressionability, which are related to the personal, the mind as an independent factor, and the soul. Those started this whole chain of ascending and descending triads. So, this is obscure material. There is a transition here, as we begin to enter the monadic realm, and even that which lies beyond it, the realm of the beyond it, the realm of the initiated or liberated monad. There is a preparation for it. So leading up to the fifth initiation, we have what might be called the initiations of the personality. We have the mind, the concrete mind, but still it is in a position of being able to discriminate and objectify. And we have the soul, what we normally call the soul. And somewhere in there as well is this direct contact with the master, which is, as I say, it may be happening from his angle, but it is unrecognized from ours. So there's quite a few correspondences here with which we have to reckon. Okay. So we can say as well that the third, fourth, and fifth initiations are preliminary to the beginning of these monadically related initiations, such as the sixth and the seventh. And then we run into the possibility of still higher preparations with the eighth and ninth initiations. Now, we can't even say that the Christ and the Buddha are preparing for the ninth initiation, or maybe even the eighth. They are preparing to complete the seventh. And maybe what's being said here is important. We're on what page? 90. Okay. In all of this, never does the geometrical pattern, the numerical progression, or the law of correspondences break down in the understanding of the purpose and the plans of the planetary logos, established before the worlds were created. These worlds within the planetary logos and within the solar system, I suppose, established before the worlds were created, and finding their prototypes upon the cosmic mental planes, which are not given to us in articulated form so that we could see what those prototypes really are. And then we will have to, well, everything there, I think, is important. We are dealing with the law of correspondences, but then the Tibetan says further something very important. These points, and he's been giving them to us in the last couple of pages, these points are peculiarly difficult for men to grasp at this time, where in their state of consciousness is concentratedly individualized. And that seems to imply the Leo presence, the sign of concentration in the meditative sequence, and also the sign in which individualization, self-recognized individualization occurred. Now, I'm just, of course, realizing, and so are you, how much careful study it would take for us to really fathom what is being said here. I think the next program will take care of the remaining part up to the next red line, which basically is about man's contribution, it looks like, to the divine plan, the disciples' contribution to the divine plan. So DK has given us some factors here that call attention to the difficulty of his finding ways to communicate these matters to us. And I'm not separating myself from you at all, because I really see how very difficult it is. So we've gone from '88 to 90 in this program 35, and I will pick up this little ending here and bring it all the way down. Actually, it's well, it's kind of 88. It's really 80, 87. And I think I will make it that way, because whenever I press 88, I get a different code. Which is difficult to deal with. So, basically, we're from 87 to 90. I never seem to get more than a couple of pages into this. And that's just how it is. So today is the 27th, and we have gone from 87 to 90, and then our next program will be 36, and I can't say exactly when that will occur, but it will begin on page 90. And so we're pretty much halfway through the book. A very difficult book, we must remark. Now, if I make a separate little this will be a separate program, and we'll call it, because it is program 35. Okay. And I'll just name it this way. It's complete in the smaller form. Okay. And then there will be something rather larger as we prepare for 36. So let's see how this works. And complete program 35. Okay. Okay, friends, so that will be it for tonight. I'm glad I had a chance to do just a little more anyway, and whether we resume in November or December, we will see. We're on page 90. So this will be posted as a program on Makara and also on YouTube, and it will be sent out as a special sending to some people who have or would like to be on that particular format. So Tuya and I wish you the very best and continuing gratitude for the Thanksgiving. However we may celebrate that, there are many things on the horizon at the moment, and more danger from new COVID-19 strains, which look very menacing, I guess I can say. But we will persist the best we can, and the whole team, Mikhail and BL and Joe and Harold and Michael, Stacy, and also Frederick, we all wish you profound studies and understanding. When I read this material, I just say, well, I'm hoping that I can sufficiently understand, and of course the only way to really do that is to review and read with care and attempt to have the experiences rather than just the words. So I will end the recording, and this will be up for you quite soon, I think. Hopefully by tomorrow at some point. So many blessings, and we'll be with you again as may be possible. Bye for now.